Back in my final year at MSU, I was invited to take part in a research expedition to the Hanja wetlands in northern Sweden. It was part of an exchange through the AWC, Arctic Wellness Cooperative, funded by members of the Arctic Council and private actors in the area. Me and Roger Rock Dawson took a flight in early May. During the 55-minute layover at Arlanda, Stockholm, we met up with Helene Engermark from the Royal Institute of Technology. When we arrived at Umeå Airport, we met up with the last member of our expedition, Camilla Ostermo from Luleå University. From there, it was just a long drive north. The Gania wetlands are enormous. We're talking about 700,000 acres of mire and wetland just above the Arctic Circle. In optimal conditions and excluding factors such as sleep, food, terrain, and weather, it would take about 11 days to walk across. In my head, it conjured up images of the dead marshes from The Lord of the Rings. But, Helena assured me, it was nothing quite as dramatic. Raj and I had no idea what to expect. We had gotten our equipment pre-purchased. The Swedes were in charge of everything practical on site, excluding our personal equipment. We scheduled to spend 4 days in the actual mire, and 4 more days accounted for travel. And sure, we had wildlife and camping experience, but you can't prepare for something like the Arctic mires. May is a strange time in northern Sweden. While technically spring, it can still dip into sub-zero temperature Celsius. The weather can range from blazing heat in the afternoon to frost in the early morning. So, while we had a variety of clothes, we still had to be flexible enough to change throughout the day. There's no one thing fits all up there. The further north we drove, the more things started to look the same. Long stretches of road through the wilderness that seemed to go nowhere. Nothing but moss, undergrowth, and sprinkles of spindly trees. I was chewing on my last Lim Jim when Helene brought up her laptop. So, we have 8 designated sites where we need to do some sampling, she said. But Camilla and I have been talking, and we think we ought to get at least 1 further in. We have to go a bit off-road to get some reliable results. When did you talk about this? I asked. Gotta read the group chat, said Rock. I told you to get in on that. I'm in. I'm just not getting notifications. Then you're not in. I'm telling you I'm in. Either way, said Helene. If we take a detour north after Site 3, we ought to get some reliable samples before we reach 4. It should work with your schedule. We are the locals. You got this. Sid Rock. I'll leave this to your judgment. We're not locals. Sid Camilla. I'm from Luleå. That's like a 4-hour drive. Stockholm is like a 12-hour drive from there. So, we're going in blind? I asked. One of you've been there before? That's kind of the point. To get acquainted with it, said Camilla. To get something for the next group to compare when they do another expedition in 5 or so years. All about long-term cooperation, smiled Helene, like it says on the website. Rock leaned over and patted me on the shoulder, holding up his phone. I just checked, and you're not in the group chat. We were stuck in that car all day. We reviewed our notes, plans, equipment, and route. Much of what spurred the expedition to begin with were reports of wildlife changes. The indigenous Sami people had moved their reindeer herds north, claiming that their animals were getting sick from the soil. There had also been reports of reduced fish population and increased bird migration in the southwest. We were there to measure possible toxins and soil changes, to, if possible, determine a cause. But first, we needed samples, which was the meat of the expedition. There started to pop up little villages along the forest road. Well, maybe not villages, more like loose collections of houses within view of one another. Red houses with white corners and metal roofing. How anyone could live that isolated was beyond me. Still had great phone coverage, though, somehow. We passed through a town with a name I won't even begin to pronounce our spell. Too many vowels. It was our last stop before we got to the wetlands, so we made sure to stock up. Camilla got us some extra batteries. When we finally arrived, it was dark. We'd been following a gravel road for the past 40 minutes. There were 6 houses in a semicircle along the road, one of which we dwindled for the night. The rest were abandoned. Camilla tracked our stuff in and collapsed on the living room couch. Helene took the downstairs guest room. There was a second bedroom upstairs with 3 smaller beds for me and Rock to occupy. I was asleep the moment my head hit the pillow. The following early morning, it was all hands on deck. Helene was preparing sandwiches in the kitchen while Camilla tracked our equipment. All batteries charged, all containers properly marked and sorted. She was meticulous, and at 5:30 a.m. we were ready to go. It took a moment to soak up the atmosphere. The smells felt alien yet familiar. The air was buzzing with insects, and I could hear nesting birds in every direction. Despite the 4 of us being the only people in the area for miles and miles, it felt very much alive. It was a vast forest without a canopy, with the waking sun gazing down on us from an endless sky. Helene took the lead, with Rock following suit. Then there was Camilla, and finally me. There were paths marked with orange flags showing us the intended way. "Anyone know any good songs?" asked Helene. "You could teach us some," said Rock. "Preferably something we can pronounce as long as we make noise," said Camilla. "It keeps the bears away." We began our rendition of Small Gruduna as we trotted along the path, going deeper into the wetlands. Minutes later, it was clear to me there'd be no way to navigate the mire without those little flags. Everything looked the same. The same trees, the same bushes, the same moss, and no clear paths to follow. We weaved and bopped through the mire. We all wore these tall rubber boots and pants, along with backpacks that only reached halfway across our backs. There'd be spots where we had to wade through water that could reach over our knees, so we had to keep as dry as possible. It was a pain to walk through, and I could feel a rash growing on my thigh within the first 15 minutes of walking. We reached our site at 7 a.m. Camilla brought out the testing equipment. She and Rock took turns calling out what kind of samples they were getting, while Helene recorded it all on her laptop. I cataloged and stored everything. Took us about 30 minutes, all in all. As we packed up to move to the second site, Camilla pointed out something in the owner growth. "Lots of animals here," she said. "Look!" She pointed at the ground, but I saw nothing. I shrugged. "How do you say it? Yortrin?" "Lynn, what's that in a—" "Cloudberry." "Right. There should be cloudberries here. See the petals?" "What in the hell is a cloudberry?" chuckled Rock. "Never heard of it. Makes great jam. Add a Thailand." "Maybe we'll see some further along," said Camilla. "When there's less animals, it took us 4 hours to get to the second site. We spun around in circles for a while and had to get the Saturdead to find our way back. Standing out there with water up to my knees, looking for those orange flags. It was scary. Camilla seemed confident, though. "At worst, we'll just go straight southwest," she said. "As long as we can see the sun, we can navigate." True enough. When we got to the second site, there was a stretch of dry ground where we could rest. We stopped for lunch. Helene set up a portable stove to make some coffee, while Camilla and Rock got the samples. Soil, water, vegetation, all kinds. "Still nothing," said Camilla, poking around the moss with her feet. "No Yortron, cloudberries, Rock at it. Right, cloudberries, all gone." "Is that strange?" I asked. "Sort of. Reindeer usually don't go this far out." We finished up and moved to Site 3. We were finished just after dinner time. We had a few more hours until sunset, so we decided to move north. Camilla and Helene had mapped out a place where we could get more reliable samples, and it'd just be a few hours off the trail. There'd be plenty of dry land to set up camp as well, so it didn't mess with our schedule too much. When we stepped off the trail and left the orange flags behind, I cut this itch along my spine like I was stepping into something out of my control. Those little flags were the only trace of civilization left. Without them, we were in the deep wilds. And still, no cloudberries. We set up camp around 8 p.m. The sun was getting low, but we had plenty of flashlights with us. We changed our clothes, set up our tents, and crawled into our sleeping bags. Camilla read an article on erosion, and Helene uploaded her best images to Instagram. Even now, we still had great cell coverage. Rock was taking notes and double-checking our batteries. I twisted and turned back and forth for hours, but I just couldn't get any shot-eye. My eyes kept popping back up. Long after the others were asleep, I was still up. It was useless to keep trying, so I decided to walk it off. I stepped out of the tent and wandered around for a while. The horizon was blood red, and the sparse trees cast long, gangly shadows across the camp. A thought hit me. We'd forgotten to set up the mosquito lights. This place ought to be flooded with mosquitoes. But there was nothing. It was all quiet. Not a bird, not an insect. Nothing, just creaking branches, carefully swaying in the wind. Compared to what we'd felt when we first stepped into the mire, this was dead. It was almost midnight when I saw something in the distance. There was this long stretch of ankle-deep moss water next to our campsite. I'd looked out across it for at least 10 minutes before I realized that one of the trees wasn't a tree. It was a reindeer. The thing had been standing perfectly still, not even moving its head. I'd mistaken its antlers for branches. I sat there looking at it for at least half an hour, and in all that time it didn't move a muscle, not a twitch of the neck, nothing. Never seen anything like it. Eventually I got back in my tent. I barely got any sleep. The reindeer was gone by morning. I told Camilla about it, and she insisted that they were skittish creatures. They'd stay away from us. Maybe it was just curious. We got the extra samples early in the morning and started to move east towards our main route. By then, we all had soggy feet and a sour moat. Camille and Rock had a long and intense discussion about preservation efforts and EU regulations while Helene kept stopping to take pictures for her Instagram. At around 9 a.m., we all heard something in the distance. The discussion died down as we all tilted our heads and listened. At first, I thought it was a wounded animal. There was this rising and falling squeal like a big bird call. It took us a few seconds to realize that it was a person. A monotone scream, over and over, the exact same pitch and tone. This desperate, heart-wrenching death scream. Someone's calling for help. We circled back and tried to locate the sound, but it just seemed to get fainter and fainter, as if whoever called for us moved further away. We tried yelling back, but they didn't seem to get any closer. After about half an hour, we couldn't hear them anymore. Rock was visibly shaken, his cheeks flushed and eyes watery. We were all a bit uneasy about it. Camilla tried to make sense of it, saying it might have been an animal, but we couldn't figure out which one. Still, it had to be an animal. It had to be. As we made our way to Site 4, we shared our thoughts. There were a lot of things out there that didn't add up. No birds, no insects, no animal trappings or markings. It felt off. We found our way back to the main route with the orange flags. Following them, we spotted something that would come to haunt us forever. On the path ahead was this large, overarching tree. Much larger than others in the area. From the tree hung no less than 4 reindeer carcasses. They were simply placed there. The endlers tangled into the branches, dry and tangled flesh dangled like sick fruit. Hooves gently tapping against one another in a mild breeze like a nightmare wind chime. Helene put away her phone and Camilla stared. Slack-jawed, I had none to give. Camilla tried to say something but lost the words along the way. Composing herself, she gave it another try. Sometimes the bears, they hide their prey. This isn't hiding, said Rock. This is full display. I don't know what to tell you. We looked around, spotting strange markings on the bark, mostly hoof marks, but also something else. We were all shaken after seeing it. It haunted me. I could almost imagine hearing the dead hooves if I stopped to listen. We got to Site 4 at 1 p.m. Same procedure as always. Camille and Rock cut the samples. Aline took notes. I catalogued and stored it. We had a late lunch, but couldn't find anywhere to set up the kitchen to make coffee. We were going to the deeper mire, and dry land was getting sparse. Following the orange flags, we had to stop several times to navigate. We were coming up on what should be a large lake, but there was nothing there. A slope into more moss with no trees. If anything, it looked like the water had been drained. Aline took some pictures, but Camilla was convinced we were off track. There was no way a lake would disappear on its own. We had to be going the wrong way, no matter what the sat-nav was telling us. Still, we followed the flags. And just past 2 p.m., we got to this enormous open space where the trees spread out. We could see from miles ahead, and somewhere out there heard it. Again, someone calling out for help. The same monotone scream, the same pitch. This time we didn't call back. Instead, we just stood there listening. We identified at least 2 sources, one to the northeast, one to our west. The screams were coming from 2 different directions, whispered Helene. That's a person. What's more likely, Helene, asked Camilla, that a pair of identical twins are following us and calling out to us? Or that we're hearing the echoes of a nesting bird? I don't think anyone here is an ornithologist, said Rock, so we can't tell for sure. But yeah, I don't think that's a person. It's saying yelp. Say what you want, but that's something else. And somewhere in the deep torn of Wales, both Raj and Camilla had gone silent. One of them almost tripped over me, giving me a mild kick to the chest. I say mild only because it didn't kill me, but I'm pretty sure it bruised a couple of ribs. Another stepped on my thigh, ripping open a 2-inch long cut along the side. Still, little by little, I made it out. I kept going forward, no matter the sound. No matter the pain, I kept going. As the sun rose, I couldn't hear them anymore. I had collapsed in the moss, panting like I run a marathon. There were no songbirds, no insects, nothing. Just me, the sun, and the mire. I used a plastic band for my underwear to make a makeshift bandage, using dry moss from a tree to soak up the blood. It wasn't a deep cut, but it could easily get infected. I could still stand, but I felt this sting of pain in my chest with every breath I took. I could see a deep bruise forming, going straight from blue to a reddish purple. I was lost. I was in the middle of nowhere with little to no equipment. I've never been so freaked out in my entire life. I screamed and cried, I don't know for how long. One moment I wanted to lie down and just wait for someone to find me. The next, I wanted to run blindly straight ahead. After a while, I composed myself. I thought about what I'd learned about the area and what I'd seen. I knew there were flags put up along safe routes. I could also use the sun to navigate. If I went straight southwest, I should stumble upon the flags again. From there, I'd just have to follow them. I'd either pop back out where we started, or on the other side of the wetlands. Still, either way would be a long walk, and there were no guarantees that I'd make it. But I had to try. I tried not to think, not to reflect. I focused on the road ahead and the position of the sun. Everything else was secondary. But every flash of what happened that night felt like a cut in my stomach. The wake of Mila's flashlight disappeared. Roger screamed with that first bite. The only one I couldn't account for was Aline. I hoped against hope that she got out, that she had the same idea as me. Maybe I'd meet her down the line. If not, I could tell the police that there was at least one person unaccounted for. They'd have to send a rescue party. I must have walked for hours. It is surreal to walk in a space where all you hear is yourself. There's usually some sort of external sound. A car passing by, a squawking bird, a humming motor. Something. Somewhere. Off in the distance. Out there was nothing. Just the ever-present crackling sound of dry branches snapping onto my heels as I limped forward, step by step. I lost all concept of time and swayed back and forth between single-minded purpose and scattered brain despair. But in a moment of clarity, I stopped to listen. Screams again. They were ahead of me, so they weren't following. They were merely in the area. I flinched as I saw branches move in the wind. My reptile brain thought they were antlers. I hunkered down and listened. Helene. This scream wasn't like the others. It wasn't the same sound over and over. They were different and irregular. She wasn't screaming for help, but in pain. She was alive. Now I had 2 choices. I could try and keep moving until I found the flags and just hope to get out somehow. Or I could try to find Helene and her things. She had the sad nap last time I checked. It was a battle between my instincts and my reasoning. I'd be putting myself in danger either way, but if I could help her in any way, I had to try. At the very least, I could try to fetch some supplies. I followed Helene screaming. She was heading straight north, deeper into the mire. She was on the move, slowly but surely. I measured the distance. After a while, she stopped screaming. I figured she'd passed out. It took me about an hour of searching before I found something. There was a young tree that had been stripped of leaves and covered in blood, like someone had grabbed the bottom of it and dragged their hand along it. There were clear red stains across the leaves. There was no trail to follow, but I could hear something moving to the north. Maybe more reindeer, maybe a lean. The ground started to get muddy. There were algae and weeds drying in the sun. I could hear screaming in the distance. Not like a lean, not like a person. Just those reindeers, just those creatures, pretending to be people. There were many more of them now, so many more. I could hear dozens of them screaming back and forth, screaming for help. I pushed on. I had to see, to know. There was something up ahead and I needed answers. There was a small hill, and after that a sudden drop. I crouched at the edge, looking down. There was this dried-out lake with a deep crack in the ground going down the middle, revealing parts of a dark underground cave through the mud and debris. I could smell the moss drying in the sun. It must have been midday by then, but the sun was casting harsh shadows across the mire. There were hundreds of reindeer, some standing up, others shuffling along on all fours, all moving in a circle around the crack in the ground where something massive moved. Some of the reindeer were dragging things along, pieces of flesh, dead birds, and fish. I could have sworn one of them was dragging parts of Camilla's tent. They were neatly lined up and took turns dumping whatever price they had into the crevice. Those who had nothing to contribute stayed on the sidelines, eating. Everything looked so different in this light. I could have sworn most of the moss and flowers they ate looked strangely blue, and there, among the debris, was Helene. Her unconscious body was being unceremoniously dragged through the mud and dumped in front of the crevice. I could see her head moving, struggling to regain consciousness. I could see her mouth moving, but there was no way to hear her over the wailing screams of the creatures. But for a short moment, I could have sworn she saw me. Just a moment of recognition. Then, without a sound, something emerged from the crevice. A long, bone-wide hand, large enough to wrap its fingers across her chest, carefully dragging her into the dark. For a moment, the reindeer got quiet. Awful crunch echoed through the makeshift clearing, and seconds later, the reindeer made a new sound. This time in Helene's voice, a tired, barely conscious voice. Calm down. It's it. Help me. These 4 words were repeated over and over by all of them in her voice in all constellations and combinations. Come help. Help come. Down. Help. Help down. The horrid screams replaced by a dying whisper. A whisper intended for me. I was too afraid to move. I stayed there, looking down. Every now and then, that large, bone-wide arm would emerge, sometimes to put away something inedible, sometimes to grab a hold of a reindeer to trek into the deep. At one point, a white finger touched the forehead of a reindeer, making it stand up on its hind legs like a humanoid. Those who stood up seemed to be of great importance as the others circled them, but there was no one to save, and there was nothing left for me to gather. All that was left was for me to leave, and never look back. I kept going south. Every now and then I'd hear them, a whisper of, "Come help me," making its way through the sparse vegetation. Come help me. These things were everywhere, and they were looking for me. Reindeer have a great sense of smell, so I took a short dip in stale lake water to hide my smell. My leg would definitely get infected. I limped my way through the undergrowth, stopping only to listen for clues on what paths to avoid. By nightfall, I still hadn't found any flags. My leg was in such a burning pain that I couldn't lean on it anymore, and my muscles ached. I was constantly out of breath, not wanting to draw too much air into my lungs. But I had to keep going. If there was a good chance that I'd die out there if I had to spend the night in the open, temperatures could easily dip into freezing. Once the blood-red sunset started to gleam in the distance, I knew I was short on time. My hands were shaking, and I could barely stand. I could barely move. Everything in me wanted to just sit down and hope for everything to be okay in the morning. It was so easy to trick myself into doing so, but I just kept going. I stopped. There was something up ahead. I caught a glimpse of eyes, reflecting the setting sun. For a moment, they locked onto me, and a second later it burst into a sprint. I thought I was done for. I had no fight left in me. I turned to run, but I only made it a few steps before I tripped. Then, gunshot. The reindeer collapsed next to me, those big black eyes meeting mine. It struggled to breathe. "Help! Help me!" it whispered in Aline's voice. "Come down, come help me, come!" I didn't understand what it was saying. It was just noise. But there was something there, and as that reindeer opened its mouth to speak again, I caught a glimpse of it. Something thin and bone-white, lingering far down its throat. Something vaguely humanoid. A second pair of eyes looking up. Then, have you ever heard about the guy who lives in a tent in Yosemite National Park? I can't remember anymore if I read an article or saw a documentary, but the story goes like this. This man was totally done with life. Depressed, hated his job, couldn't see a point in being alive. He drove out to Yosemite to kill himself. I don't know why jumping off a mountain was his suicide of choice, but whatever floats your boat, I guess. Anyways, the story goes that he got there late in the day, climbed up a mountain, found a steep cliff, and got ready to jump off. By the time he got up there, it was real dark, and I don't know if he was scared or wanted more time to prepare. or he just wanted to be able to see that the drop was deep enough that he would surely die. But he decided to wait until morning. When he woke up, he saw glorious pink sunrise seeping across the park. The light splashing the trees, the chorus of birds greeting the day, the stunning mountain views around him, the crisp morning air in his lungs. Anyways, he decided not to kill himself, because in that sunrise he saw the beauty of nature, the beauty of life, the beauty of the park. So he decided, hell, I won't kill myself. I'll just stay here. If I remember right, he works temporary jobs half the year, which nets him just enough cash to enjoy the other 6 months of the year in Yosemite, sleeping in his tent, reading books, hiking, and truly enjoying his life. I wanted to start with that, just in case anybody reading has never experienced the transformative power of nature. I fell in love with it young. I was a Girl Scout from ages 6 to 16, and I know some troops just do the lame stuff, sewing and selling cookies. But my troop leader was obsessed with giving us the full Scout experience, gender be damned. We went on campouts, learned how to make fires, survive with nothing in the woods, how to pack a backpack for a long trip, how to dig a hole to shit in, which plants will give you a nasty rash and which ones are safe to eat in a pinch. Here's a wilderness survival fun fact for you. Did you know that often, when somebody dies of dehydration out on a trail, their water bottle still has water in it? That's because they try to ration the water, to only drink a sip every hour or something. But the thing is, your body can't do anything with just a sip of water. It won't save you. When you're dehydrated and lost, you should drink as much of your bottle as you want. If you don't take anything else from this story, take that. I never drove out to a mountain to kill myself, and then changed my mind because of a sunrise. But nature has saved my life in other ways. I've made a lot of lifelong friends on hiking trails, people from all different walks of life brought together by a simple appreciation of a good, dense forest. I actually have a group of buddies. We call ourselves the Trail Hounds, because our noses are always to the ground trying to sniff out new places to hike. Which is cheesy, I know. We camp out together a few times a year. Even with college, we'd rearrange our weekends, skip classes, blow off dates, whatever we had to do to get out to the woods together. They're all like family to me. Which is probably why my blood family, my mother and father namely, were so surprised when I announced my solo trip across the country. "Don't you want to take a trailhound or two with you, Joanne?" my father asked. I had just graduated with my bachelor's degree, and after doing the math on my last tuition payment versus the amount I had saved from my shitty part-time job, I'd miraculously maintained for all 4 years of college, I had a pretty solid chunk of money left over. My parents advised me to invest it, or keep saving for an eventual down payment on a house, but I figured, fuck it, the world is ending. I'm buying a van and driving west. When I was growing up, we never had money for travel. I'd explored just about every corner of the Great Smoky Mountains, but I'd only seen stuff like Yellowstone, the Rockies, or Yosemite in photographs. I thought, I'm 22, I'm done with school, I have some cash, let's fix that. Some of the trailhounds offered to come along. Pam said she could delay her start at the lumber company for a few months. Logan said his girlfriend didn't mind if he tagged along for the first couple weeks while I got my rhythm. But I couldn't ask them to put their lives on hold for me. All the trailhounds were like that, starting jobs fresh out of school or in happy relationships, or one, Cheyenne, even had a baby on the way. They had their plans, and I wasn't going to interrupt them for mine. Besides, I figured it'll be a soul-searching thing. Maybe, like Yosemite guy, I'd find my place in the world. Or, if not a physical, actual place, I'd find my spirit or something. I don't know. I've read all sorts of books and watched all kinds of movies about nomadic life on trails, and everybody seems to find peace with themselves deep in the great outdoors. And I needed some peace. My maroon van and I set out from my hometown on the border of Tennessee and North Carolina on a hot day in late July. I wanted to paint her a more fun color, like a light blue maybe. But as a single young woman traveling alone, I knew that calling attention to myself with a flashy van wasn't a bright idea. I named her Aggie after my dad's college football mascot, his suggestion when he saw her maroon coloration. We tried other names, but Aggie stuck. My dad helped me transform the back into a nice sleep space. Nothing fancy, just room for a mattress with some storage underneath and a bit of insulation to keep out the summer heat and keep out the winter cold a little later in the year. I didn't really know how long my trip would last, but I wanted to be prepared. I can't emphasize that enough. I was very prepared. I had emergency food, water, and gas, a hatchet, physical paper maps, a satellite phone, battery-powered radio, jumper cables, solar batteries, a knife, first aid kit, tire chain, spare tire, ice scraper, duct tape. Hell, I brought one of those foil blankets you're supposed to use in an emergency. I was ready for any possible scenario, which is why, as you'll see, what ended up happening was impossible. I still don't understand it. The trip started great. It was everything I dreamed of when I planned this. Late-night coffee at roadside diners, mostly attended by truckers. Long days of hiking before crashing in the van, cooking over a crackling fire under a blanket of starlight. The pure wonder, as I got further and further from home, seeing landscapes and animals I'd often imagined but never experienced. It was magical. Moose, for example, they're really fucking big. Like, really fucking big. As tall as the van. I was parked off a dirt road that led to a campsite on the edge of the Rocky Mountains, eating a sandwich in the driver's seat, prepping for a hike up to a ridge to see the sunset. I love sunset hikes. And one walked in front of my car. Instantly took my breath away. I hope all of you get to experience wonder like that in your lifetime. Things got weird pretty soon after that, actually, as I headed down out of the Rockies and toward the desert. I picked up a hitchhiker in Colorado Springs. No, not like you're thinking. It wasn't some creepy guy in ragged clothes sticking a thumb out on a dark interstate at 3 a.m. Her name was Kara, and I ran into her outside of a gas station. She was a tiny woman with long dark hair and a tank top and jeans. She asked me which direction I was going, and when I said I was headed down to New Mexico, she offered me $20 of gas money to tag along till Albuquerque. I turned down the money but agreed to the ride. I'm 5'4", so if someone looks tiny to me, they must be pretty damn harmless. And I like helping people out. I'm not religious, but I generally believe that what goes around comes around. And when I'm kind to someone, I figure someone will do me a kindness down the line. I won't get into her whole story since that's private and not overly relevant. But to summarize, she was a traveler like me, who'd gotten into a fight with her traveling partner and been abandoned in Fort Collins. She'd gotten a ride with a truck driver who'd seemed nice, but then had started requesting favors, if you get my drift. So she'd run off when he'd stopped for gas in Colorado Springs and had been waiting for someone else to come along. She liked the look of me. The $20 she offered me was all she had left, but she had a friend in Albuquerque who she knew could help her if she could just get there. It's a good 5 or 6 hour drive there from Colorado Springs, but she ended up being such good company that the time passed quickly. The sun set a couple hours in, and I had been planning to stop for the night at a hostel in Santa Fe, but I figured, hell, I can keep going. I'll get Kara to her friend's place. She'd done a trip like mine when she was younger, before she met her traveling partner. We exchanged stories of being a woman alone on the road, lying to creepy gas station attendants that we had a boyfriend in the car, layering up hoodies and flannels to make our gender less obvious when we had to leave the vehicle at night. I even shared my favorite trick with her. I read it online a few years ago, I don't remember where, but when I'm camping in my van, I drop a big pair of men's boots next to my boots outside the door, so people assume I have a big tough boyfriend sleeping inside with me. I stole a pair of my dad's old work boots, ones he didn't need anymore. I couldn't attest with 100% certainty that the ruse worked, but I can attest that nobody had fucked with me while I was sleeping in my van up to that point. Kara got a little quiet. I thought you said you were stopping at a hostel. You sleep in the van? Sure, I replied. I mean, it depends on the night. Sometimes I stay at a hostel. Some nights I even get my tent out if I manage to snag a spot at a real campsite. But yeah, lots of nights I just drive a little off the beaten path and crash in the van. But you're not going to do that tonight, right? She seemed a little upset. I tried to ignore her change in tone. I mean, I might. Seems kind of dumb to drop you in Albuquerque and then drive all the way back to Santa Fe for the hostel when I'm trying to head west. We can stay at the hostel together, I don't mind. I don't need to be in Albuquerque tonight. I smiled. That's real sweet, Kara, honestly. But I've slept in my van so many times, it's no big... You shouldn't sleep in your van in the desert. She cut me off. We'd been talking for hours, but Kara had never snapped at me like that, and her tone was totally bizarre, like she was genuinely scared for me. After a weird, tense, quiet moment, she continued, Joanne, you said you're from North Carolina, right? And this is the farthest you've been from home? I nodded. I've been out that way before. Lots of trees. The Appalachian Mountains, you know why they're shorter than the Rockies? Because they're older, I answered, trying to understand her point. They've been weathered down over millions of years. She made a satisfied sound. That's right. Much, much older. More stable. You're in the Wild West now. Out here, things are newer. Constantly changing. Shifting. Learning. What are you trying to say? It's hard to explain. We shouldn't even be talking about it. But listen, I'm from here. There's stuff out in the desert that's not safe. And the metal walls of a van sure as hell won't stop them. Do you understand? No, I don't. Who's them? Just, please stay at the hostel. I like you, Joanne. I don't want anything bad to happen to you because you don't know the area. I was getting frustrated. I have maps. That's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? Can you just tell me what's out there? I've already said too much. Seriously, Joanne, it's bad luck to talk about it. Don't worry, don't freak out. Just stay at hostels and in registered campsites until you hit California. Please? I sighed. Okay, fine. Thank you for the heads up. Over the next few hours, I tried to subtly ask more questions, but she was smart and incredibly stubborn. She always just shook her head and steered the conversation back to road stories. I dropped her in Albuquerque a little after midnight, right on her friend's doorstep. She was a woman named Jess, and tried to invite me to stay the night, but I didn't want to take advantage of her hospitality or intrude on the two reunited friends. Kara begged me to stay until the sun came up, promising that it was no big deal, and only calmed down and let me go when I lied and said I was going to head back to the hostel in Santa Fe. We hugged goodbye. I gave her my phone number and we vowed to see each other again someday. Jess and Kara waved at me from the driveway until they were specks in my rear view, and I got back on the interstate, heading west. I felt a little bad for breaking my promise to Kara not to sleep in my van, but I couldn't really think of a reason not to besides her vague, ominous warnings. And as close as I'd gotten to Kara, probably as close as you can get to another person in a matter of hours, I didn't put a lot of stock in her fear. Though she insisted that the desert is totally different from what I know, there are people like her where I'm from too. People who believe that a couple of sticks can tell you where to dig a well, that you can tell a baby's gender by how low the pregnant mother's belly hangs, or that eating black-eyed peas on New Year's Day brings you luck and wealth in the new year. And I'm not claiming to be a complete skeptic. I'd eaten my share of black-eyed peas year after year, lovingly prepared by my mother. But this solo trip was supposed to be about discovery, and playing it safe was no way to find myself. And hell, in the spirit of honesty, I was dead tired. Getting Kara to Albuquerque had been a couple hours past my planned destination, and I'd been driving since early in the morning. Once I felt I was sufficiently far from the city, I took an exit, drove down a dirt road till I couldn't see the interstate, put up my window shades, dropped my boots and my dad's boots outside the back door, and passed out. I woke up a couple hours later. I knew it had only been a couple hours because it was still dark out and I was still exhausted. At first, I didn't understand what had woken me up until I heard the sound of footsteps crunching in the sand outside. I froze, alarm bells going off in my head, remembering Kara's warnings. But as I kept listening, they walked away. They weren't even particularly loud. It very well could have been a coyote or antelope or some other desert animal. I was surprised I'd even woken up. Breathing a sigh of relief, I turned over and tried to fall back asleep. But just as I reached that place, between waking and sleeping, I bolted upright. A chill had gone down my spine, an unexplainable jolt of adrenaline. I listened carefully, and sure enough, the footsteps had returned outside. I listened as they walked in a slow circle around the van, then another, then another. What do they want? I thought. If it's an animal, it's smelled everything it can possibly smell by now. What is it doing? Then, without warning, a large thump against the side of the van made me jump. I let out a little yelp, against my will, and then immediately slapped my hand over my mouth. Please tell me it didn't hear that. But it did. Or, at least I think it did. Because the strangest noise started coming from outside. My immediate instinct was that it sounded like a laugh, but not. It was a halting, hiccuping, throaty sound, sort of like a coyote yelping or maybe an elk bugling, but quick and rhythmic. And it was quiet, forcing me to really focus to comprehend it at all. But then it cut off before I could. For a moment, there was only soft desert wind. Then the footsteps walked off. Sleeping was hard after that. Despite my exhaustion, I laid there for the better part of an hour, my heart beating in my ears, anticipating the return of walking feet outside. I don't know when I finally went to sleep, but when I woke, it was 9 a.m., and the inside of the van was getting hot from the sun. In the light of day, I cautiously removed my window shades, remembering last night's events, scared of what I might see. But the desert outside looked like a desert. No footprints in the sand, no dent on the side of my van that had been thumped, no police officer waiting to arrest me for illegally camping on private property. I felt relief course through me. I laid in my cot eating a granola bar, laughing at how scared I'd been, how I'd let Kara's warnings terrify me. Last night had probably just been a confused animal, or maybe even just a nightmare, a concoction of my paranoid and sleep-deprived brain. Looking out now, I couldn't believe I'd been so scared of somewhere so gorgeous. It had been dark already when we'd crossed into New Mexico the night before. Looking now, it was my first real look at the desert. The bright yellow sand was dotted with shrubs and cacti. In the far distance, I saw a beautiful mesa, like something out of a painting, striped red and orange and rich dark brown. I took a few pictures to text to my mother when I had service again. Eating done for the time being, I stretched, ready to get back on the road. I opened the back door of the van. My boots had moved. A chill ran through me. The night before, I swear I dropped them with the heels towards the van, the pairs right beside each other. Now they were about a foot from the back door, facing it, as if two invisible people were standing there staring at me. It made me feel uneasy. Why would somebody move my boots? It must have been the person messing with me last night, right? Well, very funny. I quickly put my shoes on and threw my dad's in the back, hopped in the driver's seat, and peeled out of there. I wasn't going to wait to see if the prankster was still around. Though I got a bit of a later start than I wanted, it was a good day. I made a few stops at places Kara had mentioned to me that I wanted to check out. A turquoise store where all the jewelry was hand-carved. Pretty, but expensive. A restaurant that sold antelope burgers, tasty, before ending the day with a beautiful hike up a mesa to watch the sunset. The trail was totally empty, which I was initially pleased by. The empty parking lot meant I could spend the night there without causing any problems, and there's nothing worse than noisy tourists ruining your quiet contemplation of nature. But after the sun dipped below the horizon and I was confronted with the reality of walking back to my car in the dark, knowing I was the only human being for miles around, I began to feel a little uneasy, remembering the events of the previous night. My flashlight had a strong beam, which I kept to the ground, not interested in seeing what was around me. I felt a paranoid itch on the back of my neck. I kept trying to remind myself that I was 100 miles away from where I'd been the night before. That was just a random run-in with a jackass who wanted to fuck with me, on and on. But no amount of logic can talk you out of an uneasy feeling. At one point, I swore I heard footsteps crunching behind me, but every time I stopped to listen, the footsteps stopped too, and I realized it must be my own feet scaring me. Nothing else made sense. Usually when you're hiking alone, it's a good idea to hum, chant, or sing. I'd been singing the entire hike up. It doesn't matter if you can sing well, it's just about making noise. Constant noise assures that any wild animals nearby will hear you coming, and most likely leave the area. Most animals only attack when startled, so if they can hear you coming from far away, you won't scare them. They won't feel the need to defend themselves, and everything is just a whole lot nicer for all parties involved. But that night, I couldn't bring myself to make any unnecessary noise. Usually, I love hiking at night. It's a great opportunity to look at the stars, especially in the desert like this where there are no trees. But I walked as quickly as I could back to the van, dwelling on nothing, the feeling on the back of my neck never going away. When I got there, I dropped my boots outside and immediately shut and locked the doors. I breathed a sigh of relief, feeling as if I'd just escaped from a chase with a murderer, though I'd shined the flashlight behind me a few times and seen with my own eyes that nothing was pursuing me. I put up my window shades and ate some cold leftovers from earlier. I had been planning on cooking a nice dinner over a fire after my hike, but now, inside the van, I couldn't bring myself to get out. It was still only about 9 p.m., so I read a book on my cot by the light of my flashlight until I eventually fell asleep. I woke up in the night again to footsteps around the van. I started shaking. Something about this thing, energy, presence, nightmare, something about it made me feel like a kid again, terrified and small, unable to protect myself. The footsteps circled the van, then circled again, and again. I lay completely still. It thumped against the van's side, making the whole vehicle shake. But this time, I was ready. I didn't yelp. It felt like a minuscule victory. But then it thumped against the other side of the van. Then the front, then the back doors. It was like a barrage from all sides, like a group of people were trying to get in, trying to break the doors down. I bit my tongue as the thumping got louder, closer together, making me realize, this can't just be one thing. It was all around me. How can one thing surround a van? After about 10 minutes, it got so bad that I thought the van might actually cave in around me. The banging was so loud, Aggie was shaking so bad, they had to be making dents out there. I gritted my teeth. No matter how scared I might be, I wasn't a kid, and I could defend myself. Mustering my courage, I yelled out, "Stop it!" The thumping ceased all at once. "Get away from my van right now. I have a gun in here, and I'm not afraid to use it." I tried not to let my voice crack on my bluff. I had a hatchet and a knife, but a gun was the one thing I wasn't equipped with on this trip. I knew how to use one, but I never took the classes or got the license. And the last thing I wanted was to get pulled over in another state and caught with an illegal firearm in my van. The person, or people, or thing outside was quiet for a moment, and then it, or they, or whatever, made that noise again. The hiccuping, laughing, jolting noise. It was all around me, much louder than the first time. It was such a horrifically unnatural noise, I can't believe I compared it to a coyote or an elk. No animal I've ever heard could make a sound like that. So choked and wheezy and wet, and I don't know how to say it in words, but I know I'll never be able to get it out of my head. Panic rising in my chest, I kept talking. "I'm serious! Leave, now!" The sound died down. I heard the footsteps start to circle my car again. They stopped short by the back door. Then I heard them getting farther away. It worked. My intimidation worked. I was overjoyed for about 5 seconds, and then I heard, as it walked away, it began singing the song, the one I sang on the hike up the mesa. It couldn't form words, really, so it was just the tune, but it was unmistakable. In broken, weird, wheezy tones, the thing sang my song. My blood froze. It had been watching me. It was the same thing from the previous night. There was no denying that now. I don't know how, but it had followed me here. It had seen me hike. It had followed me back to the van. The feeling on the back of my neck all the way back hadn't been paranoia. It had been my body trying to warn me. I felt sick. A million questions flew through my mind. We were totally alone on the trail. If it wanted to hurt me, why hadn't it done it when we were both outside? Can it not touch me? Why not? Or does it not want to? If it doesn't want to hurt me, what does it want? Just to mess with me? Why? Does it want me to leave? Am I in its territory? But how can one thing have territory that expands over 100 miles? I thought back on Kara's words. I wish she had given me her phone number instead of the other way around. I needed help. I had no idea what was going on. I guess I could call my parents or one of the trail hounds, but they'd probably just think I was crazy and ask me to come home. I laid awake until the sun came up. I took off the window shades one by one, intensely studying my surroundings. If something was out there, following me, unless it was fucking invisible, I would see it. It's a desert. There aren't trees to hide behind. But I saw nothing. I really had to grab my boots. Everything looked normal outside. I took deep breaths. I counted to 3, then threw the back doors open. I reached down to grab my boots. One of each was gone. What? One of my boots and one of my dad's boots was totally gone. I looked around, thinking maybe they'd just been moved, like the night before, but I didn't see them anywhere. I had another pair of shoes, some sneakers, which I threw on instead, leaving the pairless shoes in the back under my cot. If I got out and looked, maybe I could find the other 2, but that was a risk I wasn't willing to take. I could buy new boots. I drove away, hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. I stopped for coffee to combat my exhaustion, then tried to figure out what to do with myself. I was too on edge to really enjoy any of the things I was planning to see that day. But after my coffee, my head cleared a bit, and I remembered Kara pleading with me to stay at the hostel instead of in my car. That was the problem, I realized. Whatever it was, it wanted me alone in my van. I decided to stay at a hotel that night, no matter how expensive. With a plan, I felt much better, and though I was running on only a handful of hours of sleep, I managed to have a pretty good day. I continued to slowly snake west, visiting a national monument, a tourist trap that claimed to have real alien remains, and finally reaching the part of Arizona where saguaro cactuses grow. I never knew a cactus could tower above me, could live for hundreds of years. The beauty of the saguaros reminded me why I went on this trip in the first place. To experience new and incredible things, to help me feel at peace. With newfound clarity, around 7 p.m., I began looking for a nearby hotel. I spotted a La Quinta off the interstate and decided it would do just fine. A nice-looking lady with her hair in a high bun was manning the desk. I asked if they had any available rooms. "Let me find you something," she said with a smile. "Any specific requests?" "Just a standard room, whatever's cheapest," I replied. "How many nights?" "Just 1," she nodded. "Hopefully you can get some good sleep." Did I look that bad? So wrecked that she had to comment on it? "I've been sleeping in my van the past couple of nights," I explained. "It's been a little rough." I saw her expression change, just barely. Her eyebrow dropped a centimeter, her lips tightened. "In your van? Around here?" I shifted uncomfortably. "Further east, more towards New Mexico. Just off dirt roads, that kind of thing." Her smile dropped altogether. "Get out." "What?" "Out. Now." I was astonished. "Excuse me?" "We don't have a room for you. Leave. Keep driving." I felt tears prick the back of my eyes. "Please, I need somewhere to stay. Charge me anything you want." She leaned over the counter, speaking to me with quiet intensity. "Listen, I'm sorry, but I can't have that here. I just can't. Get out." "I don't know what you're talking about." Now she was getting upset. "Don't lie to me. We both know why you haven't been sleeping. I'm not letting you bring that to my hotel. Get out." I tried to put on my sweetest, most polite voice. "I'm not trying to bring you anything but business, ma'am. I promise." She shook her head. "It doesn't matter if you try or not. I can see it now. Its mark is all over you. If you stay here, it'll come. And I'm not letting that happen. One of them, here, that's the last thing this town needs." "What is it?" I desperately whispered. "We shouldn't be talking about it." She bluntly replied, "Now get out. Keep driving. Leave the desert." I can't. I can't keep driving. I'm too exhausted." "You can, and you will. Now get out before I call security." There was no use in arguing any further. Just like Kara, she wouldn't talk about it. I drove around for hours, stopping at every hotel and motel, regardless of cost or how shitty it looked. Nobody would give me a room. Some wouldn't even let me through the front door. I guessed that Miss La Quinta had called around with a description of me. I felt cursed, outcast from society. I couldn't get a hotel room. I couldn't keep my eyes open long enough to drive all the way out of the desert. It was hundreds of miles in every direction. In a last resort, I pulled into some dirt right off of the interstate to try and sleep. My hope was that, since I was right off the road, where people were constantly driving by, the thing might leave me alone. I didn't put my boots out. I just put in my window shades and laid down. In the back of my mind, I knew this was a shitty idea. Even if the thing didn't get me, I could get in trouble with the police for sleeping in my car on a random pull-off. You're not really technically supposed to sleep in your car on public property, the exception being rest stops, and even then it varies from state to state. Maybe I'd get arrested and could sleep the night in jail. The thought was actually a little comforting, which would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. I also worried about not being able to sleep due to constant traffic noise, but when it started to get late, and it approached 24 hours since I last slept, the cars passing were a gentle lullaby that lured me to dreamland. It didn't last. Of course not. It couldn't be that easy. When I woke up, I first noticed that it was silent outside. No road noise. I guess even the interstate doesn't have very much traffic when it gets to be late enough. And then, I heard them. Those stupid fucking footsteps I'd gotten so used to listening for. I immediately reached for the hatchet I kept under the passenger seat, clutching it to my chest. I didn't give a fuck anymore. I was ready to kill this thing for some fucking sleep. I listened as the steps circled the car 3 times. On the second time around, it began singing my song. A chill went down my spine as I realized it was better. The thing's singing was getting better. It was still clearly not human, but it was a better imitation. What the fuck? I remembered Kara's words. Out here, things are newer, constantly changing, shifting, learning. I waited for the thumping to come. By now I knew the pattern. It was watching me, following me, listening to me, and copying me. It wanted a reaction. I wouldn't give it that. Once the thumping started, once it was all around me, and I had no chance of missing, I'd jump out with the hatchet. I don't give a shit what this thing was. It couldn't follow me if I cut it in half. It kept circling. I waited. All at once I heard the screech of metal as the thing began pushing my van. I fell off my cot to the van floor. That was not what I fucking expected. And worse, the van actually fucking moved. Somehow this thing had gone from weakly thumping against Aggie's side, giving me a little scare, to being able to fucking shove a 5,000-pound van across sand. What the actual fuck was this thing? How was it getting stronger? Suddenly, I realized that I had nothing outside, no boots, nothing to protect. The interstate was still close. If I jumped into the driver's seat now, I could floor it. I hadn't gotten much sleep, but I'd gotten enough. I'd drive all the way to California. I'd watch the sunrise from the beach. I'd wake up from this nightmare. Frantically, I began searching for the keys. I kept them on a hook above the cot for easy access, but in the first big shove, they'd fallen somewhere. I dug through the pile of blankets on my cot, then began clawing around under the bed, waiting to feel the cold metal of Aggie's key. Outside, the noise of the van being shoved further out into the desert was deafening. Motionless rubber tires being forced to carve through sand made a loud, sickening crunch. I wondered how fast we were moving, how far away I was getting from the interstate, my salvation, my way out. And as I searched, even over the noise, I swear I heard the fucking thing trying to talk. "Autist," it said, sounding like 2 voices of opposite pitches trying to speak in unison, sounding wheezy, sounding choked, sounding distinctly unhuman. "What is it?" It repeated, the words getting more distinct. I realized it was imitating me, trying to say what I'd said to the hotel receptionist earlier. It could hear me, even then. How closely had it been following me? I began to cry, choked by sobs, struggling to find my keys, now struggling to even see through my tears. Hearing me cry, the thing stopped its sick imitation and started up with its horrific laugh, all around me, just as loud as the shoving. And then, sitting on my van floor, sure I was doomed, that this thing was going to take me out into the desert and eat me and assume my identity, I remembered. I left the keys in the ignition. I wanted to be able to hop up there and look like I was just taking a quick break from driving in case the cops showed up and caught me sleeping in my van in a non-rest area. Holy fucking shit. The world snapped back into focus. I threw myself into the front seat, turning the key. The engine sputtered. Come on. The thing outside was still laughing and pushing. I turned the key again. The engine sputtered. Aggie, please, for fuck's sake. I turned the key. The engine came to life. I gasped a sigh of frantic relief. I pressed the gas and heard my wheels turning in the sand, but I didn't move. The thing was holding the van in a monstrously strong grip. Somehow, though I put the pedal to the floor, it was able to hold me back. So, in an act of sheer desperation, I threw the van in reverse. As I floored it backwards, I heard tires squelching across flesh and a broken, wheezy, wet scream. I breathed hard for a moment. The van was motionless, engine still running. To get back on the interstate, I had to rip off my window shade. I had to look. I couldn't hesitate for long, or it might move again. It might grab me. In one fluid motion, I yanked my black cardboard shade from the windshield with my right hand while turning on my lights with the left. I saw it, laying there in the sand in front of me. I wish I could describe it to you in a way that makes any sense at all. It had skin that was a warped mixture of gray and tan, with thin patches of disgusting fur, like an animal with mange. It had antlers, sharp antlers, like a deer, but they stuck out of the sides of the head, not on top. It didn't have ears. It had holes where ears might be, gaping black holes. Some blood seeped out of it, presumably from me running it over. It had a little tail, long, thin arms with fingers that appeared to have 3 or 4 joints each. They were bent in so many places. It was huge. And this is what upset me the most. Its shape was not constant. As it lay there, twitching, trying to get up, sometimes as it pulled, its torso would stretch longer, or it would expand wider, like it was a liquid, like it was spilling out of its own horrific and diseased skin. I only looked for a moment, but I can still see it every time I blink. I have a photographic memory for this one specific moment of my life. On its left foot, it wore my father's boot. On its right foot, it wore mine. I didn't stay to watch it stand. I took a sharp left and drove through the sand, quickly but carefully, making sure not to run down any saguaros on my quest to get back to the interstate. I don't know if I went the fastest way, because I wasn't sure what I was doing or which direction I'd been pushed. But it took me almost 20 minutes to find a road again, despite the fact that I was pushing 80 miles per hour. That thing had pushed me into the middle of fucking nowhere in a matter of minutes. I drove all the way to California. I didn't make it to the beach by sunrise. The thing assaulted me around 2 a.m., and it was 7 hours out of the desert. But when I began to see palm trees, I cried again, heavy with exhaustion and terror and relief. I must have looked like a lunatic, standing knee-deep in the ocean, wailing. I was planning on going to a car wash next, but when I examined Aggie, she was spotless, like the thing had called its blood back to its body somehow. I shivered at the thought. I had a few more issues on my cross-country solo trip, but nothing like that. I haven't experienced anything like that since, and I hope I never will. I did get a call from Kara, though. She apologized for taking so long to call me, expressing that her old traveling partner had taken her cell phone when he abandoned her in Fort Collins, and she was just finally able to buy a new one. We caught up. She let me tell her about the thing. I know she thought it was bad luck to talk about, but I also knew she was the only person who would ever believe me. She said she was sorry I'd been through all that, and earnestly promised to see me the next time she was around the Great Smoky Mountains. I said I'd do the same if I was ever around Albuquerque. She grew very serious. That's not a good idea, Joanne. What? Aren't you still there? Did you have a fight with Jess? No, I'm still here. But you shouldn't come back. Ever. A chill went through me. Oh. Don't worry, Joanne. Nothing is going to happen to you. As long as you stay away. Drive up the coast. Oregon is beautiful this time of year. You can go east from there, yeah? I grew a little sad, thinking of the gorgeous saguaros, the colorful mesas, things I barely got to appreciate because I was so consumed with fear during my time in New Mexico and Arizona. I can't believe I can never go back. Kara was quiet for a moment, then spoke with intensity. Let me put it this way, Joanne. It lives for a lot longer than you do. It's always learning, and it never forgets a scent. I did end up going the long way around. I got to see Yellowstone, Mount Rushmore, all kinds of stuff I'd only seen in movies. I really did find myself, in a way. I learned what I'm capable of. I learned to put the bad memories behind me, to make room for better ones. I met lots more people like Kara, people who I came to call lifelong friends, much like the trailhounds. I laughed, I cried. I took 1,000,000 photos and sent them to everyone I knew. I think everyone should take a solo trip at least once in their life. It's the first time I really felt like my own person, totally separate from my family, my history, my friends. Just stay away from the desert. Or, if you really want to see it, and it is beautiful, listen to the locals. Stay in a hostel, motel, hotel, with a friend, whatever you prefer. Just don't sleep out there in your van. And if you do, and you see a thing I still have nightmares about, running around wearing 2 mismatched boots, please don't tell me about it.